Good morning. Would like to call the Finance Committee to order. All members, Alderwoman Finlayson, Alderman Payon, and Alderman Arnett are present. First order of business before the community is the approval of the agenda. I would like to add 2 items to the agenda, if we might. The first one is because the city manager's here and Julian is here. I almost could not make this meeting this morning because once again, my cable was out. It has come back, who knows for how long. I had to scramble last week to go to a meeting and sat next to David where we shared viruses. And then for the council meeting, I had to come in and sit in the council office. At that time, there was no camera on our dingy old dusty computer that we share amongst the 8 of us. I think I heard this morning that Brian Paquin attached a camera to that one thing, but if 2 or 3 of us are down, I think we need to be thinking about setting up a station. So I've actually talked the agenda item, but I do want to talk about that briefly. And then what was the other one? Oh, yes, I want to add, giving you a brief report from the Financial Advisory Commission. It was a very good meeting last week, and I wanted to give you an update on some important things that happened at that meeting. So I would like to amend the agenda, at least for the second one, an update from the chair on the Financial Advisory Commission meeting.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the agenda as amended. Right.
Jody, you have a comment?
Did we get added to the agenda this SA 1121?
No.
That was sent to it was sent to everybody 2 days ago. The APD, they had a contribution from Fordham Brewing and they wanted to appropriate it for spending.
What's the amount, Jody?
Takia was on the email too. The amount is $1,187.
I don't remember that at all.
I don't remember seeing it either.
I didn't get it, but also don't forget that the agenda is posted on Friday, so it wouldn't be on the agenda. But
we sent it to amend it 2 days ago.
Right, but I can't add it to the agenda. It has to be added on the floor. Okay. But I have not seen that email.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing it either.
I'm resending it right now.
Okay. And then I'll...
Fred, do you and Sheila have it?
Nope.
I don't have it, no.
I can describe, Mr. Chair, I can describe that contribution if you're wanting to put that on the agenda.
Well, I'd like to just make a comment. There seems to be an assumption by all of the staff that alderpersons have an office and a desk that they sit at and watch emails stream by. We're part-time and we really don't have a desk to sit at. So if there's something important that we need to see, I think it would really be helpful if we could get a phone call or a text message or something alerting us to look at the email. Sometimes I don't look at email all day long, and I catch up with it when catch can. But so for important things that really need to be brought to our attention, David, I would direct this comment to you. You got to help us help ourselves. I mean, if it's something that that needs immediate attention, there's got to be a better way of letting us know.
I got it.
And when we get,
I'm happy to do that.
Of other email, yeah, that would really be helpful for me at least, and I would appeal to my colleagues. Maybe that. So, I don't see it yet, but I'm looking.
I got it. I got it from Monday.
Okay. So I'll try to pull it up and find it. But is there a motion to add that to the agenda?
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that'll be part of the amendment to the agenda.
All right.
So moved.
All All right. So is there any further discussion of the agenda? My God, we're halfway through the meeting and we haven't even approved the agenda yet.
This is late in the afternoon on Monday that I got it. So,
okay. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the September 2nd meeting.
Mr. Chair, I reviewed the minutes this morning and they seem to be satisfactory. I would move their approval.
I'll second that.
All right. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you, Takia. As usual, they did the job for us. I appreciate that. The first item on the agenda is SA 6-21, which was a grant that was on our last agenda, and there were some questions about that. I really would like that discussion to occur with the chief present. I would note that we did receive back on September 2nd from Katie a copy of the grant application, and I understand it much better now. I do have some questions, and colleagues may also, but I see Deputy Chief Herman's name showing up. Let me start with the question: have committee members had the opportunity to review the grant application?
Which number is this?
This is the SA 6-21.
I have not.
All right.
I have not. I was waiting, Mr. Chair, for this meeting. I got a note that the police chief needed to be a part of this. So,
yes.
I spoke to him and he was not aware. So I wanted to have an opportunity to, hear from the chief.
Actually, in reading the grant application, we really should have the public safety chair here as well. Because she's management team. Deputy Chief Herman, are you here instead of Chief Jackson? Would you be able to participate in discussion of this, or failing that, committee, should we move on to other business and come back when Chief Jackson is here?
I'm not authorized to speak on his behalf on this matter. There are a couple issues that he and I discussed, but I'd rather he discuss those in person.
Right, because we have you down for another item, which is to discuss the issue of officers thinking that the Finance Committee and the Council defunded the police department, and specifically discussing the number of officers who are appropriated, who are authorized, and who are actual. And I will alert everybody, this is very much coming into play with the ongoing appeals case for the Eastport Shopping Center, where there are questions about the number of authorized officers and whether or not they're meeting the adequate public facilities counts. So this is not something that is in passing interest. This is very topical and timely. So,
Mr. Chair, this is Susie.
Yes, hi, Susie.
Since you're at various stages of understanding this grant, may we just begin by giving you some background information that I apologize I couldn't provide at your last meeting, and then hopefully the chief will be here when you have your questions. Tola has been working on this, and we certainly have talked with the police chief about it, and Chief Herman has been involved in those. He has some different views. He shared those with me yesterday, actually. So if we can give just kind of like go back and start again if we could, because this is a grant that the mayor's office applied for, that the governor's office requested that we apply for. They were impressed with some of the NAM programming that the mayor's office had done, and I was responsible for that as well. And they were interested in what kind of a model would we do in this kind of a diversion program. And
can I stop you?
Sure.
Susie,
Sorry.
I want to coordinate with the committee members. I don't have a problem proceeding as long as Deputy Chief Herman is here, but I think part of the reason we wanted to defer this is to make sure that coordination was going on between police and the mayor's office. And it became clear subsequent to the last meeting that the chief was not aware. And so part of our reason is to get everybody all on the same page. It's not questioning the efficacy of the program itself. But I would also ask for myself, I have no idea what NAM means. I have no idea what LEAD means. LEAD is used here. It's never defined. So for myself, at least, I'm operating with a deficiency of understanding of some of these acronyms. So it'd be very helpful if we could get that.
Mr. Chair, I would much prefer that we wait until the chief is with us. Major Herman has said that he's not authorized to speak for the chief. And I would hate for us to have to go back and revisit what Ms. Smith is saying right now for the sake of the chief being present. So I would hope that we'd wait until everybody's online to begin this discussion.
I share that sentiment, but I would turn to City Manager Gerald. Do we have any notion about the chief's whereabouts and when he might appear?
I'm reaching out to him. I just texted him. I just called him a minute ago and got his voicemail. So I will continue to try to reach him and let you know.
So is it the sense of the committee that we move on to the next item of the agenda and come back to this? All right. I apologize to all of the staff. I see Mr. Rao is here now with us also, and I see Alderman Gay's face. I'm glad he's here. But we really have an important principal that is not with us at this point. So let's defer this and move on to the next item on the agenda with the consent of the committee. I do have that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, all right. So, well, the next item is also the chief, but we added a couple of other items to the agenda. So we can go into those now. The first item that we added to the agenda was a brief report from me on the Financial Advisory Commission meeting. And I think the Finance Committee members, and all the council will be very interested in some of the topics that were discussed at the FAC. This was the meeting of the 10th of September. The first item on the agenda was a very interesting document, and gee, you don't have it, but it is a document that Jody provided, and she can probably walk us through, looking at the revenue situation for this fiscal 2021 and the already developing shortfall. And I'll let Jody give us the overview, but we're projecting a revenue shortfall at this point of $3.3 million this early in the fiscal year. So Jody, is there, or let me ask the committee, do you want, it's a 2-page sheet, fact sheet. Do you want that sent to you before we discuss it? Yeah. Jody, is there a way you can send that to the other committee members, or have someone send it, please?
And if you want it to go onto the screen, I'll have to send it to Julian as well.
All right. There were other important aspects of the FAC meeting that I wanted to go over. First of all, there was a very healthy discussion of the bond authorization, which we passed at the last council meeting. But I just wanted to mention that in passing. They reviewed it. They were on board with it. And I think that's one of the things that the FAC does for us. They tend to take a deeper dive into some of these issues because they have some people on the committee that are well versed in this. And it was good to hear that they were very comfortable with the ordinance that we passed. So I just mentioned that in passing. The next thing that was discussed, and I found very interesting, is the Resiliency Financing Authority. David gave an update, and he may give us a brief update, but that work is moving forward, and there's a goal to have, that work is moving forward with the city and the county, and there's a goal to have legislation to us in December or January. David, did you want to sort of give the same briefing to the Finance Committee you gave to the FAC?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. So they initially set up a work group consisting of county people, Jody and I, to get the ball rolling on this. Then we decided that we would set up the groups decided to set up 3 subcommittees. One subcommittee being the structure / organization for what the Resilience Authority is going to look like after it's established. So that's the group that I'm on. The second is the revenue funding subgroup, and Jody, of course, is on that one. And then the third is the projects and the way the projects will be carried out. So we pulled Mike Johnson into the group, and so he's on that subcommittee. The subcommittees are meeting about every couple of weeks. The main work group is meeting about once a month. We've had several meetings. Dan Neese and Joanne Throw are also involved. They're sort of the facilitator for the whole process. They have county people assigned to head up each of the subcommittees. So, for example, Chris Trumbauer is the chair of the subcommittee that I'm on for the structure and organization. As Alderman Arnett mentioned, our goal is to have legislation prepared and ready to introduce either late December or early January to both the county council and the city council. We want to be able to show when the state legislature comes into session that we have moved forward on the authority that they passed the enabling legislation for. So we'd really like to have that moving forward in a real way with legislation when they come back into session next year. So lots of work to be done. We're looking at a lot of different models from my perspective for the organization and trying to narrow that down. And then each month, each of the subcommittees reports back to the work group and talks about progress and decisions made to date. So that's where we are.
So, David, one of the notes that I took from the meeting is that one of the difficulties you're having is that we're kind of on the vanguard with this, and there aren't really directly applicable models that we can look to elsewhere. Has that changed? Your last statement sounded like maybe you have found some other models to look at.
Well, there's no other resilience financing authorities out there. I think this will break new ground. There's other, like there's a stadium authority that raised money for the Ravens Stadium. So there's similar things like that. There's similar organizations within the county, economic development, and some things like that we're also looking at. But there are no resilience authorities. So how the funding's going to be put together, and Jody's working on that, but how that's going to be pulled in is going to be really interesting and important. And how far the for the projects, how far the authority will go will be just a matter of identifying the projects that need to be done, but also potentially and eventually carrying out the projects, having their own staff to actually manage those projects and hire consultants and put them out for bid. So all of those things are being discussed, and the thought is to start small and then let it grow from there. The first project out of the box is going to be the city dock revitalization project. So everybody agrees with that, and so
as far as we know,
lots of good work.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Is it appropriate to ask a question?
Is that Alderman Gay? I can't. Yeah. Yes, of course it's appropriate. Please.
David, I do remember we had the work session in regards to this, and I thought that they did a really good presentation. So I'm glad to hear that it's moving forward. Will this, the legislation that Ross is talking about, will this all be lumped in? And we talked about Monday night as well with the Naval Academy projects and just all of the efforts to kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page and that these projects can move forward and all of that good stuff. Are all of those things working at the same time is my question?
To some degree, yeah. So the Naval Academy one is really, that was funded by DOD, Department of Defense, and is really focused on ways to make the areas around military bases more resilient. So there was some discussion of changing out traffic signals so that when something happens, that people will be able to get off the base and out of the area expeditiously. So that's really more tailored towards what's going to benefit the Naval Academy, but will be done out in Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. So it'll benefit our residents as well, but they're funding that. And so that's sort of a different matter. The Resilience Authority is really an opportunity to find alternative funding sources for resilience projects. So the state passed legislation this year during the 2020 session to enable these types of organizations. They did that at the request from Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. So what this group is going to do? Are
they kind of like laying out a guideline? I remember they did like show us how to get the funding or what funding was available, and then would the idea be that the deputy city manager who oversees stuff like this would oversee that process to make sure that we're getting the appropriate funding and make sure that we're actually, completing projects and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And I'll also be interested in those as well. But yeah, so the authority will prioritize projects based on criteria that's set up. As I mentioned, the City Dock project has been agreed to be the first one out of the box, but the county has a whole bunch of resilience issues, as do we. So those will all go into the Resilience Authority to prioritize, and then they identify where funding opportunities are to fund those projects. So that's their real purpose, is to either issue bonds, seek grants, or seek other funding so that those priority projects can move forward.
Are there questions from the committee members?
None from me.
I would, Alderwoman, yes.
Did you call on me, Ross? I'm sorry.
Yes, I did. I'm sorry.
Okay. David, you said that you were working on legislation in time for the session, the winter session. Does that include discussions with the legislature about bond funding or funding that will come from the state in any form?
No, so the legislation that we want to have ready is to go to the city council and to the county council to actually establish this authority. Mm-hmm. So why I mentioned the state legislatures, they passed the enabling legislation. Mm-hmm. we expressed that there was urgency to do that quickly and to do it during this last session, and they did. So we just want to show them that we together are moving forward with this by introducing legislation with the county and the city. There will be opportunities to continue to request capital funding from the state, and we plan to do that. And I think when the authorities stood up, they will continue to do that for these types of projects. And we've kept our delegation informed of what's going on with this legislation. But otherwise, the legislation that we're working on is going to be for the city and county councils.
And I'm sorry, I understood that. My question really was about funding from the state, and if the intent is to pursue state funding also.
Absolutely. Any type of funding that might be available for resilience, the authority will pursue. So not just, some of the sources that have been talked about, like hotel tax or stormwater fees or some of those types of things, but also grant opportunities as well.
The University of Maryland has a division that deals with environmental funding. I assume that somebody in the group is going to pursue their, they have spoken many times before LGAC about structuring financing, and they may have some opportunities for funding. And I can't think of what it's called, but it's some financing authority through the University of Maryland.
Yeah, I think Dan Neese and Joanne Throw are actually part of that group, because they're primarily financial types of people. Yeah, okay. So they're very much involved with setting up this authority as facilitators.
Mr. J.
Thank you.
So just in closing, at the fact the bill, which was passed in January of last year, Bill 539 was passed out. I had a version of it, but I was glad to get a more recent one that isn't at the bottom of some pile in my office. So if you want to see what the state authorized, that's in that bill. A question for the committee. I've got another topic to discuss, but in response to an observation made by Alderman Gay at our last council meeting about sharing information, like I feel I don't really hear much from what is going on in the Public Safety Committee, but I also feel that maybe this kind of reporting at the city council meeting on things like this fact report might be of interest to the council writ large, and I've probably been remiss in not including that in my report, my Finance Committee report. What's your sense? Is this something that I really ought to pick up on and add to the length of the council meeting, or are you finding it useful to get these reports?
Well, I will say that I am, and I think we should provide the report to the council. It's their choice as to whether they, will read it or not, but I think they should have access to it.
All right.
I agree with that. I may or may not find it helpful myself, but I think there are people that would, and what do you have to lose by sharing it?
Right. Well, I have to take the time to write it up. That's what we have to lose, but I should probably be doing that. There was one other exciting thing for me, at least, that the fact took up, which is the spending affordability report that they've been working on for a while now. And we got a report from Bob Burden. And this is something where they've been looking at an analysis that is done by usually higher level authorities in the state and elsewhere. But we got a report on the spending affordability function, which really looks at our level of spending versus our level of resources. And you know from our Finance Committee report that that's an ongoing issue. There's a lot of work that is done at the county level, and they have a lot of different sources: Sage, EBRI, Townsend University, RESI, which I'm not sure what that stands for, and one other source. I opined before the fact that I thought that this was something we would do, but I also felt that maybe we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. Maybe we should try to partner with the county in the same way we're partnering with the county on the resiliency. They have a lot more resources to throw at this than we do. But I throw that out for your observation, and also would invite observations from David and Jody. I think this is a must-do for us and for top-level financial planning. And the committee gave us a very thick report, most of it what the state does, and all of the information sources, a lot of which are federal, but also other research resources. So there's a sort of a template for how to do this already before us. The problem at the city level is a lot of data don't drill down that deeply. So you have to do more attributions and sort of piecing things together, which is actually what I did as a profession. So that's probably why it appeals to me, maybe more than most. But they agreed to move forward with continued a deepening look at this spending affordability process, and we'll be coming back to council probably first to the Finance Committee with some recommendations on next steps, and they'll be discussing that presumably at their next fact meeting. Again, this is one of the things that I think the fact does for us that is really valuable, and which we usually as all electeds don't either have the time nor or the professional background to necessarily do, or even fully comprehend, but they do. So I find this a very positive step forward, but that's me. I would welcome any comments or questions the committee would have. Are you awake?
We are.
Okay.
We're reading all the documents that you all have sent us.
Yeah. Well, further reporting from me on this, the fact will take it up, but I wanted to let you know that's in the works, and I think it's an important thing that they're doing for us. So did everyone receive the 2-page revenue report from Jody that she gave to the facts that shows our growing revenue, or at least our current revenue shortfall of an anticipated $3.3 million? I don't know how much more than that you need to know. Jody, it feels to me like a lot of these shortfalls are falling more in the enterprise funds, although we do have a big shortfall in interest, rent, and other. Are there some quick highlights that you could give the committee from that 2-pager?
So I hope I didn't send you anything regarding enterprise funds, because there's nothing on there. That 2-pager is all.
Oh, you're right. It's all on the general fund.
Right.
We did talk about the enterprise fund, what's happening with parking.
Right. I need to get transportation and parking done and projected. I'm just trying to, hopefully they will together be able to break even this year. There's not going to be any extra in those funds, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get enough revenue to match the expenses for transportation and parking. That's my general comment on those 2 funds. And on, Julian, did you get that? Can you put the schedule up and I'll just run through it real quickly?
We're coming up.
May I ask a question of Jody while we're waiting?
Of course.
We received a document from Katie which was the quarterly ending June 30th budget versus actuals. Is there any indication of a fund balance?
Not yet. I have to take those expense projections that we now have. We're fairly closed, but we still will have a few transactions slip in the next couple of weeks. And I'm going to take those expense projections and these revenue projections and then give you an analysis of the anticipated fund balance. And some of that fund balance we projected in the budget process. So if there's anything in excess of what we projected, we can talk about what to do with that.
Sheila, I was going to
the fund balance yet.
I thought that would be more appropriate to come up when we get the update from the finance director. It wasn't part of the FAC meeting. This revenue status was something that was presented to the FAC, and I thought the council should also see it. So we have it up. Although
yeah. So I know what you're saying, Chairman, because if my people, the pictures of everybody on the meeting was over on the right-hand column, which covers the difference column.
I know. How do you change that?
What you do is you take your mouse and you hold it on the top part of that and then drag it down to the bottom.
There you go.
And you can drag it off that column. And I just did that too because I couldn't see what I was looking at.
Mr. Gerald, in the background, you can hear the street sweeper going through my neighborhood.
Street sweeper.
It's a wonderful sound.
Yes.
Hey, it's supposed to be over in my neighborhood today.
Jody, I'm afraid the last exchange between you and Ross was not clear. The difference column is not showing up. Is that what you're saying?
Well, on my screen, the pictures of the meeting participants was covering the right hand.
Oh, okay.
And I was telling him how to drag that over so it gets off the second column because that's the one I'm going to be talking about.
Okay.
Right. So these revenue categories are generally the same that you saw during the budget process. And I gave you some of the columns that we had in the budget book itself, the 19 actual, the original budget, the adjusted budget, and what we had projected. And then that next column is the 2020 projections revised. And then in 21, you see what we adopted for 21 revenues and my adopted revised. And so the difference there that you see at the right is the difference between what we had originally had in the adopted budget versus what I'm now projecting. And anything in brackets is a shortfall, and anything without brackets is a projected gain. So when you're going down those columns, some things are right on. I would expect that most of our property taxes will come in. And then the different categories that I'll highlight for you, the ones that I think are major. These street privileges permits are regarding, putting things out onto the sidewalk. I don't know if we've waived some of those, but we don't have as many applicants for using the street. And I don't know the details about what kind of permits we require for businesses to use the sidewalk. So Julian, can you scan to the next page? Because most of the major ones are on the next page.
Right.
Jody, Mr. Chair, may I ask Jody? That line item, I think, from what I'm hearing you say, has been impacted by our extension of restaurants onto sidewalks and streets.
It could be that we're getting less of those permits because we're allowing it as a practice, or it could also be that restaurants aren't in business as much, and so they're not using the sidewalks as frequently. It could be a combination of those.
So when decisions are being made to do things like extending restaurant ability to use sidewalks and streets. You know, when we look at the cost implications, I think that should be noted. You know, because we haven't seen any impact financially on the city from that category. So,
okay.
So anyway.
But, and I will say that those decisions are made based on the programs that we're trying to deliver for COVID. And sometimes I don't hear about those until after the decisions are made, but you can see the impact here.
Could we use COVID money to, I don't want to say supplant, but okay.
We are not yet allowed to use any of the COVID money to replace revenues that we're losing because of COVID impacts. I'm
okay
for something from the federal level that will allow us to do that, but so far, no.
Okay. Thank you. It's just on everybody's radar now, so that's
yeah, good. Yeah. And now one of the major shortfalls here is the interest income. I knew in the spring we knew interest rates were falling, and I discounted that by 15% below what I thought it was going to be. But when we found out in June, or maybe in beginning of July, what we were actually earning in interest, it's actually 1.21%. And that time last year, we were earning 2.75%. So it's 1/10 of what we were earning the year before. They've intentionally bottomed out those rates, which is good when you're borrowing money, but it's good when you're trying to invest money. So that's one of my over projections, and that's unfortunate. And I'm hoping that'll pick up a little bit this year, but it doesn't look like they're going to try to move the interest rates upward.
Yeah, I think the Fed just took action to keep them close to zero.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For the rest of the year, I think they said.
Yeah. They're not intending to move them anytime soon.
Yeah.
Then when in the intergovernmental side, we're getting a little bit of hit on the hotel motel. We're not picking up as quickly. We are hiring a firm, Granicus, to track our STR taxes, the hotel motel taxes, and they're going to track and see who's paying and make sure all of our permittees are sending money regularly. So that should help, but I don't know where we're going to end up. That should be in place in the next month or so. Of course, admission and amusements, we don't have a lot of special events taking place, so that's falling short. Highway user revenue, we get those estimates from the state, and I think they gave at late spring, we had already developed it, and we're already in budget deliberations, and they sent me revised estimates. I think it came to me late May or June, and the 21 numbers have dropped off by 180,000 based on their projections. On registration fees, we're taking a...
Jody, before you go on, may I ask, Mr. Chair, may I? MML has had a focus over the years of advocating for highway user fees. We were very high, then we were cut back significantly. I think we should put it on their radar as they plan their program for this coming legislative session, that highway user fees needs to be something for which they advocate.
You mean bringing those down to the local level instead of retaining them at the state?
Yes. Yeah. Because it comes through the state, does it not?
Yes, the state's collecting them. And there was at one time there was a buildup there, and they retained it for themselves, and
right.
And the revenue flow got cut short. So
yeah. And MML has advocated for the money coming down to the local jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And did it successfully for a number of years. So I just think we should put that on their radar. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure, David, do you, Mr. Gerald, do you connect with MML as far as our needs are concerned in lobbying efforts?
I hear from them occasionally. I'm happy to give them feedback. I can tell you that they're very influential, because when we were taking the Resilience Authority bill through, they pushed back on the city size limit, and were very successful in getting that turned in. But yeah, I agree that that's a good strategy.
What is that money for? Where does it come from? How does the state generate it?
The highway user revenue is a tax on based on the gasoline sales. It comes off, I believe, it comes off fuel sales, and so the flow cut back when COVID went into effect. And we had to all stay home, and all the businesses are shut down. There was a drastic decrease in that revenue, and they sent me revised 20 estimates and a revised 21 estimate, like I said, in May or June. Got a letter from them.
Well, what do we use it for? Do we have to use it for streets, for roads?
Well, we have to show them is that it is supposed to be used for streets, either construction or upkeep. And we have to report back to them and show them that we do, in fact, use at least that much for streets. And we have no problem doing that. Our street, even our operating expenditures for the streets division in the general fund is far exceeds what we get in revenues here.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
I'm on mute. Sorry. Yes, Alderman Gay.
I just have two quick questions, Jody. At what point, when you start to predict shortfalls in revenue, do you start, as a financial director, start to get worried about the stability of the city?
So what we committed to during the budget process was that every other month, and these are the August 31 amounts, that we would project revenues, and depending on what we saw, we would take action on the expenditure side if we thought it was necessary. Now, what we have to do is see where we're at with expenditures and then decide how dire this is. We already have a savings from the fire department, about $500,000 of grant they got for something that's already in their budget. So that's going to this impact a bit. But I'll try to balance. We need to strive for a balanced budget. So provided the expenditures that we currently budgeted are on track for 21, we would need to look for ways to reduce to match this revenue flow. Or we can choose to use some kind of budgetary reserve for that purpose.
Yeah, I remember when you had a gentleman give us a presentation a while back. I think it may have just been at the peak of COVID in March. And I asked a question about at the time the news was talking about some federal fund for municipalities that they could go to get like a loan or something like that if they had, suffered through COVID. Would that ever be on the table for you, like to take out some sort of?
I don't know if there's any kind of federal agency that's doing loans. What would happen? I know what they talked about was us possibly getting a bank line of credit in case our cash flow was falling short of our needs. And that would be a very short-term thing. And as of right now, I don't believe our cash flow is that dire, although I have looked into the possibility of borrowing short-term if the cash going out exceeds the cash coming in. So that's not an issue right now. And I don't recall that anything specific about an agency that would be giving loans for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would have to look. I'm sorry that I don't. I think, my knowledge of this stuff is so far left. I think it was I don't even know. I have to look it up. I don't want to confuse anybody. Thank you, though. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I'll keep going down this list, and you can see the utility taxes that we get. Those are a little bit less than anticipated. I talk about hotel, motel, admissions, the highway. Okay, we're pretty much done with that. On the charges for services side, the recreation programs are taking a hit. Some of that's childcare. We are having some childcare programs, but they're not generating as much revenue. And then we have all of the other recreation programs that aren't either not moving forward or not as robust as they were in the past years. You see that the dock charges and the boat show fees, that's declining, and that's almost completely because of the the cancellation of the boat show. And I'd have to look into these other ones because the other category, I'm not sure off the top of my head what's in that category. In the last one, hold on. I've got to move my screen again.
And Jody, this could only, as the months start to get colder and the restaurants and everything just, you can't utilize the outdoor as a way to, loophole the COVID virus. I mean, this could only get worse, correct? As we start to get into December and November. I mean, hopefully we'll have some travel for Christmas, but.
Yeah, I think we're still going to see impacts on hotel, motel tax, admissions and amusement taxes. Those venues don't open up and start operating normally. That's going to take a hit. I don't know if it'll get worse. And when I try to project, I'm not just projecting for the 2 months that I'm projecting for. I'm trying to look out into the year and extrapolate this up into the full 12 months forward. So it could get worse. It could be worse than I have here. We're going to have to decide how we address it. But yes, we should strive for a balanced budget in some way.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Finlayson.
I think my question is for City Manager Gerald. Looking at the charges for services and particularly recreation, are we using these numbers or this data to develop programs that will boost these areas? The big push is getting outside since we can't go into facilities for recreation because of COVID-19. Go to the park, and we've got 30-some parks in the city. I would hope maybe we would start thinking about how we can increase interest in people utilizing our parks and, outside recreational activities that will help us in these categories. I mean, it's, finance knows the numbers. How do we translate that now to programming changes to help finance and help the city really pay for our expenses?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Director Trader has looked at that. He started looking at that fairly early on. He also started looking from the perspective of what can we provide for the kids that aren't in school to help keep them occupied and keep them busy and keep them being educated and, all those types of things. So we've looked at it kind of from both lenses of how do we move from having people come in Pitt Moyer Rec Center to doing things outside within the parks, and also to take care of the kids and the needs of the kids, especially, during the first month when we didn't have the swimming pool and there was not a lot for them to do. So he's addressed it that way and added a lot of programming. Unfortunately, the revenue from those programs is just not keeping up with what it was projected to be under normal circumstances. But I think they've done a really great job of being nimble and trying to adjust their programming to fit those needs.
Great. I should have known you guys were on it, so I just needed to verbalize it. Thank you.
All right. Good questions from everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, keep in mind that these are revenues and not expenses, and there may be some situations on the Rec and Park side where we will see a decline in the expenses. It's hard to project annual expenditures at this point in time in the year because we don't have a lot of trend information for this year, but we may see those savings, some of those savings, which is why we want to look at that before we make final decisions on what we need to do to compensate for this.
Jody, did you find out what other was yet? You said
no, I didn't look into it. I can I can try to, let me see if I can figure out what that is, because
that's a pretty big number, 385,000.
It could be a lot of different pieces, though. So, if you're okay, I can get back to you with that breakdown.
That's fine.
The time to research it.
Thank you.
And if I could just say before we leave this subject, and this is something that Jody is very much on top of, but for the other half of the equation here is the expenses, right? So finance is also putting together a projection for the expenses, because we're hopeful. Again, we all know that hope is not the strategy, but hopefully the expenses will be lower as well to cover up at least a part of this, and more so than just the $500,000 that fire doesn't need for the self-contained breathing apparatus, but also some of these other areas where hopefully the expenses will be lower as well. So we'll see, but we really need that piece of information before we start addressing what we're going to need to do to take care of the situation.
Mr. Chair, this is Susie. Can I add a comment, please?
Of course.
This is really such a good report for us to share with our U.S. senators and representatives, because it's the kind of specific information that will tell them why it's so important for the federal government to pass additional legislation that, in fact, provides revenues to cities. They always asked for the specific, and it's been hard. But this is a very good piece, very good document for that. And I congratulate Jody. And I'm hoping that with your encouragement, the mayor will send a letter to them with this document, making the case that already we can project this, $3,284,000, et cetera, loss in revenues because of the economic circumstances with the pandemic. So I just think this is a great piece of information, and I'll get on this right away.
I was going to say, you probably have more direct access to the mayor than any of the rest of us, and I think you're making an excellent point. And the broader point that I would make to the committee members and the council at large is this was a very, very robust Financial Advisory Commission meeting, but it is by no means unique. And I would really encourage members to come to the FAC meetings. Alderwoman Finlayson, I know they start at 8:30, but they are really very rich.
7:30 or 8:30?
8:30.
Oh, they changed their time, yes.
So they start in the middle of the night is what you're saying.
8:30 in the morning. But there's a different perspective than the kind of perspective that is usually given to the Finance Committee, like the one that we'll get to when we get the report on the fourth quarter stuff. All of them are important. All of them are good. But I think that there's a lot of stuff that goes on that doesn't necessarily reach our attention, and it's very important. And again, the point that Susie made about this particular document, I was very struck when we got it. I'm looking forward to the next bi-monthly meeting. I hope Alderman Gay's prediction that it's going to get worse is not accurate, but I suspect that he is right, that this picture is not going to get better looking for a while. So we took a lot of time for this, but I think it's important information. All of the points that the FAC took up are important to us.
Mr. Chair, do we need a motion that would request that the mayor send a letter to our federal representatives asking or demonstrating the impact through this document?
I think you just did. Is there a second?
Second.
I think that's an excellent idea, and thank you for the suggestion, Susie. Who's going to draft that motion? Is that something that that we need to do from the committee, or is that something that we can get from Office of Law, like Jacqueline Lee, or how do you want to see that happen?
I thought Ms. Smith expressed an interest in doing it. So
okay,
We'll do that.
All right. Any further discussion? Any further discussion on the motion?
Oh, I had just a quick question, Mr. Chair, if appropriate. I'm not sure of the history of our contract or how much the county pays. I know there's a controversy with how much the state pays in like the pilot and stuff like that. How much does the county contribute to our revenue for the buildings? Because I look at stuff like that as a way, why do they? No, we should be drafting a resolution that they start kicking out $1 million a year at least.
Yeah. You ever heard the story of David and Goliath? We're David. But I understand your sentiment, and I agree. And in fact, I think that's a perfect thing. We all ought to be thinking about two things right now. This is not finance, but more council. We need to draft the resolution to form the Charter Review Commission, and we each need to be thinking about the person that we want to select to be on that Charter Review Commission. But that is an excellent topic. We always have the state pilot on the Charter Review Commission as a topic, but we never have the county pilot. Now, the county in the past has rejoined that they do an awful lot of things for us that they don't charge us, and that's probably true. And of course, the state makes the same argument, but I think that it's an excellent topic to suggest go to the Charter Review Commission for review once again. We actually have three committees we've got to appoint fairly soon: the Charter Review Commission, the Redistricting Commission, and the City Council Compensation Commission. I'm going to ask the Office of Law this week to get those ready for the October
Amen to the
council meeting. Right. So, but that's a very good suggestion to add to that, and I would ask you to keep that in mind as we get those bodies up and running, and we feed in our suggestions for topics that go to their consideration. All right. We had a motion. Did we pass the motion? So we need, is there any further discussion on the motion that the mayor draft a letter to the appropriate federal bodies that point out our growing revenue difficulties?
Aye.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Yes, all right.
Aye.
All right. Do we have Chief Jackson?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's on now.
Okay.
Chief, you're on mute.
So,
Can I?
Yes. Jody?
Okay. While I assume we're going to talk about the SA that's up for review. There's another item on the agenda for the police department.
Yes.
And I just wanted to add that in that email that I sent on Monday, that I just resent, there were 2 items in there. One was this essay that we've asked about, the $1,100 that it's from the mayor's office. And there was another thing in it that we need to talk about on a police department grant. It's something in particular. And I don't know how to get that considered now, if that can be a part of the discussion of the police department that's on the agenda already, or if there's somehow a chance to get it onto the agenda again. It's an application for a grant that they need your approval on before they apply. And I don't know that a time commitment.
I resist all of these last minute agenda.
That's fine. And as far as the time sensitivity, you can ask the police department how time sensitive it is.
Yeah, we can. The reason for the resistance is because we give public notice, and it is true that I can't recall the last time anyone from the public read our agenda and wanted to opine on it. But I think to be consistent with the Open Meetings Act, we need to at least avail them of that opportunity.
That's right.
So I would like to try to get all of those things on in a published agenda when possible. We do have the ability under special circumstances to make exceptions if we deem that there's an urgency, but really I'd rather not do that. But
Mr. Chair,
yes.
My hand's up, but you maybe can't see it.
No,
I'm looking at the letter from Captain Miguez that speaks to a specific timeline for this, and maybe
which is the
director. Well, he's asking that we approve or give a recommendation at this meeting, but there was a 30-day window. And maybe Manager Gerald can speak to this far better, or maybe Chief Romali's on the line, who can speak to, I'm sorry, not Chief Romali, Chief Jackson can speak to this. But it's the Byrne grant, Justice Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant. I think we've had this in the past, but I don't remember the amount.
Right.
So maybe if it's needed, the Finance Committee can amend the agenda and include this, so we can give it our blessing, and then it'll have sufficient time to go before the full council and have an opportunity to input.
All right. I think we can do that, but we have had a lot of staff waiting for this discussion of the SA6 standing by, and I'd really like to get to that. But I would also like to ask either Takia or Julian, we're running long. Do we have anybody that will bump us anytime soon? And also, do committee members have commitments that would not allow them to run past noon for this meeting?
Mr. Chair, I'm good. I wasn't suggesting we take this out of order. SA6 is next, so I was not suggesting, but I'm good until 1.
Okay.
And we're fine.
All right, so let's do, with your permission, let's get into SA6. Susie was going to start off by giving us an overview, which I think would be helpful. And then I think we can open things up to comments and questions.
Hello everybody. I'm actually going to let Tola do most of the introductory, but I wanted to, again, as I said, I apologize for the fact that we didn't have more information for this meeting, but this is a grant from the governor's office, and it is designed by the governor or by the state. And there are 8 cities that have been granted this opportunity. It's not universally available. It was, it's like you sort of have to be asked, although we did indicate interest. So this is because, and Tola will explain, Mr. Chairman, you asked about what NAM was. He'll explain the whole history of NAM and no harm and this diversion program. And the police chief can comment on his experiences as well. But I'd like to go to Tola next, because essentially what we have now and is before you is you're accepting and appropriating monies for the coordinator, and I'm probably not got the right title. I keep using that word, and Tola will correct me. Is a person who will help design what the LEAD program is going to be for us. Law enforcement assistance diversion. This is alternatives to lock up. It's alternatives for people to regain their life. And it's not some, kind of wild thing. It is, and it will be an effort for the city of Annapolis to participate in figuring out models on how to do this. And all of that design, and frankly, all of what the public involvement or other kinds of committee, all is yet ahead of us. So while you might ask for specifics, there's an outline. Tola will go over that, or he can go over that, or if you don't want to do that. But this isn't a program that's locked in, that we therefore can tell you it's going to do this and this. It has goals that the governor has set. We want to do that. We want to do that with the police department. It was their intent to ask the mayor's office to do it, as I said, based on previous work that Tola mostly had done, and Will actually was involved with. So I'll let Tola pick up there, because...
Right, before we do that, though, first of all, I really like personally the sounds of what I'm hearing. And I think that the reason that we wanted to delve into it even more is because I think this is an integral cog into several things. One, changing the mode of policing from arrest to assist. Two, I see mentioned in here about the Mayor's Office of Community Services. I'd really like to know more about that, what that is, because we've got a lot of things swirling there, but we have in place hiring a person to start the community caring services. Currently will be attached to the city manager. But I think what we wanted to do was to get a lot more information, and we wanted to make sure all of the appropriate people were at the table. And then, so that's why we felt that it was important to have the chief of police with us also, just to make sure. So I look forward to Tola. And Tola, I would just ask for my benefit, and I know at the last meeting, we were told what LEAD means, but I don't remember. So if we tell us what acronyms are. I'm from the federal government. I know all about acronyms. We spew them out on a regular basis, but it's really helpful to know what the underlying meaning of those things are. So thank you, and please proceed.
Okay. Greetings all. So LEAD is Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. It is a national program started in Seattle in 2011. So the state of Maryland has had a couple of jurisdictions that have LEAD programs, particularly Baltimore City has had a LEAD program, Bel Air, Wicomico County. And so the governor's office, after collecting data through their OD MAP program, saw that Annapolis City was a good candidate to develop our own LEAD program, law enforcement assisted diversion, of course. So the other jurisdictions
Can I interrupt for a second? Because I saw that word diversion in the grant, and I guess I would need some help. It is an interesting sounding word, but in this context, what does diversion mean? Okay,
so by definition of the National LEAD program, LEAD is a community-based diversion approach with the goals of improving public safety and public order and reducing unnecessary justice system involvement of people who participate in the program. The following are the core principles that lay the foundation for success for the policing roles, policing role. So officers and the frontline supervisors have ownership to divert potential arrestees to a program or programs that will either help them with, whatever their low-level arrest would have been. So certain crimes, of course, anything that would be a felony would not be divertible. But I guess the overarching goal is to stop low-level arrests and create, give us resources to develop a system to provide people resources once they are diverted.
Excellent, thank you. And yay for that.
Okay. So, like I said, we were chosen along with Columbia and Howard County, Westminster, and Hagerstown, and St. Mary's County. Now, we have a 24-hour crisis service that's given to us through Anne Arundel Crisis Response. So that's one of the things that they saw that we were a good candidate, as well as the syringe service program. Now, this is not really about the opioids, but so just to explain the background, like Susie was saying, and you asked about NAM. So the Naptown anti-dope movement was started in 2018 after the mayor's office analyzed data, and the demographic data showed that 80% of the fatal overdose in the city were African Americans. So from there, we developed the community outreach, community engagement sessions where we went into the high risk overdose areas, and we did community engagement. And this helped us develop a network of people that worked in the substance use community actively. That was the NAM focus group. They became our oversight group to develop outreach and to keep an eye kind of what's going on the street level, community, the community level. So we've developed that into the NAM-CAN Community Awareness Network, where we're working with people in specific communities to help empower them to be leaders and be advocates for, substance use disorder awareness programs. So the next level, is of course, is no harm. And that's the neighbors organized helping avoid reduced mortality. And that's more focused on harm reduction, particularly, fatal overdose prevention and then violence prevention. So what we, from the data that we received from the county and the city about opioids, fatal overdoses and opioid arrests, there's a lot of intersection between people arrested for misdemeanor charges and, and opioid overdoses. So I think that we were a very good candidate to launch a pilot program like this because of our small city and the fact that we do have a significant substance use problem that can be connected to these low-level arrests. So they reached out to us in about, I think it was July of 2019. And then we started from there, building a relationship with the governor's office. I particularly took the role of building this relationship and establishing what could be the LEAD program. So we had our first meeting February 5th, internal meeting with the police chief, with William Rao, Lynn Farrell, Patty Norris, Paul Herman, Alderman Pendell Charles, and with Daniel from the governor's office to find out what was the capacity of the city to create a LEAD program. Everybody agreed that we would try to pursue it. So the next step was applying for the grant in the GMS system with the governor's office. So that took a couple months due to COVID, and we weren't able to physically meet to continue the ongoing conversation. So I've just been working behind the scenes to make sure the grant was actually approved by the state and that all the paperwork would be sent out throughout the city. So that's kind of like why we're here now. So we haven't really had any other meetings because the goal of the first year, so it's a $600,000 plus grant. The first year would have been $55,000. So we decided internally to hire a project manager that would help develop the program. And then when we get the second year funding of about $230,000, we will apply that to programming. So, and the third year will be $230,000, I believe, as well. That again will be put towards programming and hiring of staff as well. So the next step is hiring the project manager and connecting them with all the concerned parties so that we can make sure there's an efficient program that has results. And the national framework was adopted by the governor's office. So they've asked that we use that same framework to establish our local Annapolis program. I have received word that now the county is interested in creating a LEAD program, but I think we're a little bit farther ahead just because we initiated it back in July.
Okay. I do have some further questions, but I'll defer to committee members if you have some questions you'd like to ask.
Well, I'll begin. Actually, I would like to hear from both the chief and our city attorney that's online about the legal requirements of this grant. It sounds like an excellent opportunity for the city to participate. And Mr. Jaya, would you send us your description of all of those programs? I think the council would appreciate knowing all of those different programs and the audience that they're reaching, as well as the outcome of those programs,
Which
so we
program?
can measure.
Which program?
All of those that you mentioned.
Yeah. No harm. No harm is a new one. It's almost like we need a glossary of terms. There's a lot of things you're doing. My curiosity was also piqued when at the last council meeting, Alderman Gay mentioned that there's, I didn't really get it clearly, but the hiring of 10 people from the community to work on specific things. It feels to me like there's an awful lot going on that the council is largely unaware of. And I think we would be very supportive of it if we understood, and maybe we could really be helpful too. But there's sort of a mystery. Possibly Alderwoman Pendle Charles knows more about what's going on than we do, but it would really be helpful for me, I think, and I think my other colleagues to know all the things that are going on.
Okay.
The other part of my, my question wasn't really a question, but I was responding to Alderman Gay's chat. Anyway, Chief Jackson and who did I see? Carrie, Ms. Berger, I'm sorry. Legal requirements. This is a multi-year contract I think we're entering.
Alderwoman Finlayson, I actually worked on that more than Ms. Berger, so I can help you with that if you'd like.
Okay, great.
All right, so we're talking about the initial grant. Let me just pull it up. The grant itself, let's see, where is it? The grant itself will probably be on a year-by-year basis. It might be renewed, but as of right now, it's just an initial year. And subject to funding. Most of the requirements are fairly straightforward regarding you need to do different types of reporting. The biggest issue, the biggest concern I have with this is that there is a very definitive need for our Annapolis Police Department and our mayor's office to be working together in this in tandem, including that the Annapolis Police Department needs to be able to contribute funds to it if grant funds are terminated. That's how the application was written. That's how this grant is set up with the state, where it's coming out of in the state. This particular grant from the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention is not generally available to just governments in general. It has to be to the governmental police departments with active involvement. So from a legal perspective, the only thing that I'm really concerned about is that I want to make sure that our mayor's office and our police department are working as full partners on this. Otherwise, we could potentially get ourselves in trouble with how the application was submitted and the agreement was accepted, and jeopardize future grant funds. So everything else is fairly standard. It's a year-by-year one. There'll be basic reporting requirements. Everything else is fairly standard for a grant. That's the only sort of special one that the mayor's office applied for this, but legally the mayor's office can't accept it by itself. It has to accept it in complete partnership with the police department. So when I was reviewing it, I reached out to get more information on that, and I was not able to get clear confirmation of that. So I'm looking at this point for input from the police department as well as the mayor's office as to how they're going to coordinate their efforts.
Perfect segue to Chief Jackson.
Thank you, Ms. Leonard.
Chief Jackson?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was driving down 97, so I've been on the meeting for most of the time listening this morning. I'm in my office now. You asked a question, first of all, Alderman Arnett, about what diversion means. Diversion means many things. I think that needs to be a point of clarity for the Finance Committee. When you're talking about law enforcement and diversion, there are only certain types of offenses that you can divert from the criminal justice system legally. For example, if an officer, I'll give you an example better than the definition. If an officer sees somebody commit something and it's victimless, it's a violation of the law. Like if he sees them in possession of an illegal substance, that would be an example of a crime that you can divert. But if somebody's assaulted and you have a complainant victim, you can't divert that. And that needs to be clarified. You can't say, well, we're going to divert them from the criminal justice system, because that person is a taxpayer and they have a right to file charges against somebody who's committed a crime against them, even though it's a crime against the state. Technically, a complaining victim has a right to see to it that they receive justice. So we have to make sure that logistically we have the right definitions in place so that there's no misunderstanding on what we divert. I'm a fan of LEAD, but LEAD is one of those type of programs that it has to be organized. And as Ms. Leonard said, that there has to be a strong cooperation between the mayor's office and the police department. I'm asking questions like who enters it into the grant management system, who's going to be the administrator of this grant. I don't have a grant administrator, which is different from a writer. I wanted to hire a grant administrator when I first got here so we can go after these type of programs to make sure that we are in compliance with the governor's office on crime control and prevention. Glenn Houston made it very clear to me when I met with him that there's a new standard for these grants. Most of them are evidence-based now because funders want to make sure that when we engage in these type of endeavors, that we're able to report out and show real results. And so that's a concern. So I have to have a separate conversation with Tola and Susie to talk about the logistics. If I have any concerns, it's the logistical aspect of this. You know, how are we going to manage it? Who are we going to hire as a grant manager? We got to make sure that the person that we get involved in this, whoever we hire, understands law enforcement and what we can divert, what we can't divert, what structures we have to get in place. And I believe we have to have some of those things before the grant is, before we start spending the funds. Even though I know Tola talked about hiring a manager, which is fine, but we got to make sure that whoever we hire understands the totality of what the LEAD grant is, so we can put the right structure in place so that we don't get in trouble with the state and it doesn't cause us not to be able to receive grant funding in the future. And then there's some budgetary issues attached to that. When the grant is up, if we can't continue it, there's budgetary things. Is that an enhancement in my budget? I don't know. All those kind of logistical things have to be ironed out. I just don't know. But those are my concerns as the chief of police.
All right. Well, so thank you. And that's exactly what the committee was looking for. When you look at the first page of the grant, one of the things that struck me was there was no one from the police department, either authorizing physician, official, project director, fiscal officer, and when you go to the management capabilities, the city police department executive staff is mentioned there. Also, the city council public safety chair, those all sound good, but it's not really clear how all that's working out. And what was clear, and I think some of the questions that the assistant city attorney, Ashley Leonard, mentioned was there is a very strong need to demonstrate this kind of coordination. And so I guess my question as a member of the Finance Committee is how do we establish that and document that as we go forward? I personally don't think I think everyone wants this kind of a program, and we want this money. And I will hazard a guess that my colleagues on the council want that as well. But we want to make sure that we're doing this.
Can I say something?
The correct way.
I just want to put these two things out there. One, again, I said at the beginning, we had a first initial meeting in February, but then COVID happened. So, we had a pandemic we had to deal with, but the grant still needed to be applied for. So that's why, we had to kind of move forward. Even and the other thing is, Chief Jackson just started, so he's had to reshuffle his executive team. And like you said, they didn't have anyone to apply for this grant. So it's not that no one didn't include the police department. It's just that the police department has had to restructure, but we couldn't miss this opportunity to apply for this grant. So
that's all fine, but I think both Ashley and the chief have said there's more structure we need to get in place if we want to continue to get these grants. Then David Gerald has his hand up, and we'd love to hear from you, City Manager.
So just to give some perspective from my side of things, there's no way that this grant and all of its objectives can be met without the police being involved. So even if the mayor's office or my office chose not to include them in this process, it wouldn't be successful. So the police will be involved. This is a really great grant opportunity that I think everybody on the call realizes that, and the concern is about the process going forward, about how it's going to be carried out. But they will be involved, and they have to be involved because the data that they only they have is going to be required to put this program together properly. So they will be involved, and there'll be a close working relationship between TOLA and the police department, to the folks that are assigned in the police department to manage and carry this out.
So, Ms. Leonard, where do you find yourself in this? Are you getting the kinds of things you think we need from a legal perspective?
I mean, I don't per se need anything. I was asked to legally review the grant document, and I had sort of the same initial thoughts that you had. As I read it and I saw that there was going to need to be a lot of coordination, but I didn't think the application really, not that it needed to spell out more details, but I wanted to make sure that on our end, our back end, that things were set out the same way, because this is an unusual circumstance in which the mayor's office applied for a grant that would normally be applied for by the police department. I mean, these are police department grants. So because of the unusual nature, I just wanted to make sure that, one, the police department was involved, and two, that the mayor's office and the police department were working together, as City Manager Gerald indicated, so that everything would be in place, because unlike a lot of other grant agreements, this one has very strict requirements in it, and I just wanted to make sure we were meeting those before I had the city attorney sign off on them.
Okay. Alderman Gay, we'd love to know where you're sitting.
I'm coming from a resort, and I'm in Annapolis. I do have, I think the grant is great. I'm happy that Adatola is taking the lead on this. I don't. Obviously, there may be some legal issues that I'm not aware of that the police department should lead it. But I think that I'm glad at the core, the community it would be taking the charge, and their ideas would be at the forefront. And that brings me to my next point. Tola, what do you plan to do with the funds? I mean, as someone who is actually in the community, and you're seeing what happened, to your point, with the overdoses and all of that. Yesterday at 2:05, there was an overdose in Bay Ridge Gardens in the middle of the day where the community had to revive and save this man's life. So what do you plan to do with these funds, and how do you, plan to structure and set up, certain lines of communications with those communities?
Okay, so respectfully, it's not what I want to do with the money, and I wouldn't even be in charge of the money, or the funds or the program, right? One, I would just be I guess, grant coordinator of it. So the project manager would develop the program, right? So they would be in charge of coordinating with the state's attorney's office, with the police chief, with Department of Detention, the county executive's office, or what have you, and all the internal departments and different agencies. So there would be two subcommittees that would be developed: a law enforcement subcommittee and a services subcommittee. So in the year 2 is when the program would launch. So this first year is lit. All funds this first year are only to hire a project manager to develop a law enforcement Annapolis, a lead Annapolis plan. Okay. So the second year is when we would be able to hire staff for that office, whether it be in the police or I don't know. Like I said, I have ideas, but I don't want to say that this is what is going to happen, because I'm not in charge. I won't be in charge of it. That's why we're hiring the project manager. And we would expect this person to have some type of lead programming experience.
So
but I think that what this program will do is reduce recidivism, reduce people's contact with the criminal justice system, particularly around opioid arrest. You said what?
Well, could you give
you said what?
I know you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know.
What did you say?
The service there is bad in City Hall. Maybe we can talk about that next. But could you just give a little bit of background on then what would you expect out of this person then? If they're coming in and they are, supposed to be reshaping criminal justice within our city, would they have a general background or understanding of what's taking place? Will they, I guess then that does bring in the point, where is their relationship with Chief Jackson? Just a number of those things. You probably didn't hear the last little bit I said, but I was just saying, so then what would your expectation of the relationship between this person and Chief Jackson be? The relationship between this person and the community? Because if you're hiring them and expecting them to transform, arrest or policing and criminal justice and all this stuff in the cities, I'm just trying to get, I thought you would kind of be leading the charge. I just would like some clarity on that.
I will be leading the charge. I'm just saying that I'm leading it, kind of from my mayor's office staff position. But this is something that I think that could develop to be a program that, if successful, would fall under the police, right? And this person would have my help, strategically, to build relationships, and I would advise, and I'm going to make sure they have a great relationship with Chief Jackson, so that there is no tension between the city police department and the community, or even any other people, because this is a solution, but it's not the only solution. And I'm not knocking what you said about this person being brought in to create criminal. They're not really being brought in to create criminal justice reform. This is just to develop one extra toolkit to stop low-level offenders from entering the criminal justice system. So, my goal is that we have a target of, reducing recidivism for young adults and older adults, particularly, focusing on the younger adults that may have a substance use problem. Because we know that interactions with the criminal justice system lead to, recidivism, and reducing recidivism is the end game. But there's a lot of different components that the city does not control. So this person really will be helping us kind of align those different services with the police department. And like I said, once the infrastructure for the Office of Community Caring Services is developed, it might be something that goes into that office. I don't know. I'm just trying to make sure that we are able to get the funding. And if it is successful, then we can talk about how we get more funding. So I'm just excited about the opportunity to get the ball rolling, and definitely connecting them with the NAM group. The NAM group has known about this program and have been waiting to help this person for months. But again, like I said, I couldn't stop COVID-19, and we were going through budget season. There's been a lot of things that have kept this program from being kind of launched in the city. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Atola, it answers a lot of questions for me, because I did want to ask about this reference to the Office Community Serving Services, and you just answered that. Alderwoman Finlayson, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would hope, since Ms. Leonard has made it very clear that there has to be a connection with the police department, that the person that's hired will be someone that's agreed upon by both the chief and you, Mr. Ajayi, representing the community perspective. I think my concern might be that we do have someone whose approach is a negative approach to the police department, and with an objective of trying to fix the police department. And so that's not the approach I think anyone would like to take. So I would hope that the chief will have an opportunity to weigh in heavily on the person, because they've got to, he or she will have to work very closely with the police department, as well as be trusted to have access to data in the police department. I think I heard the chief express that concern. So I would like a commitment that the chief be able to, I'm sorry, am I missing a joke here? I'm sorry. I would like a commitment that the chief be able to weigh in and give an endorsement of the person that's being hired to work with his department. My other question has to do with future years funding. If this first year, the $55,000 is to be used to hire someone, I heard Ms. Leonard say that the application or the grant says that the city will be expected to give funding if there is a deficit in funding. And I heard $230,000 in the out years. So where are we with an expectation that the city would be able to kick in those funds in future years? So, and before you answer that question, my last comment is Mr. Gerald and I met, and I know he met with Alderwoman Pendell Charles, and we had agreed that the office that houses the city social worker would be the Office of Community Services. So it sounds like the mayor's office is using that title differently from what we had expected. And so that's a question for Mr. Gerald after Tola answers this.
Well, just to add on to that, my title is African American Community Service Specialist. So I kind of deal with a lot of community services already. To answer your first question, I've already committed to Chief Jackson that he be on the executive staff. Again, I I want the city manager, the mayor, the chief of staff, the public safety chair, and any other executive level person to be involved with the planning of this. So there's a planning committee already lined up that would have oversight over the hiring and the program development, truly. So we kind of got a lot of stuff already kind of set up, but I can definitely share that with you. What was your second question?
Well, first of all, let me answer. I would like to be on that committee. I don't think the rest of the council is getting notifications about that, but I would like to be on that planning committee.
Right. Okay. And again, everything was halted because of COVID. So we haven't had another planning committee meeting since February. So this person would be, that would be their main task, is setting up those meetings and making sure, people are communicated with to be at the meetings. But I think your second question was about the funding. So the second and third year funding is already allocated to the state from the federal government. Now, I can't answer what our budget deficits could be. I'm assuming that that'll be for the city manager, finance director. But so as long as, the city doesn't go bankrupt, and we will be reimbursed by the state for any of the year 1, year 2, or year 3 funding.
Okay, and I guess my concern was if the state funding dries up, will we be expected to supplant the state funding?
Well, okay, so the state already has the funding from the federal government, right, for year 2 and year 3. I'm assuming they're going to get it. So after that, that's where the decisions would have to be made. Is this something that the city wants to pursue? Do we want one of the job titles? I mean, I already put in the job description of the project manager that they will that eventually they would have to look for other grants or potential other funding sources. So, but I don't want to jump too far ahead and say what we're going to do because we still need to hire someone.
I see Mr. Chair, Jody's hand was up.
Yes, but before I recognize anyone else, I want to just jump in, and also Alderman Gay had his hand up. I think we all recognize the handicaps in the environment because of COVID and other things. And I hope you and everyone is asking these questions and that you construe that because we're really interested, and I believe all of us are both excited and desirous that this program get off to a good start and move on to a lot of successes. I mean, it is totally in keeping in my mind from this notion of moving from assist to arrest. Let's not start building people's criminal records when that doesn't have to happen, and we get them in a locked-in path that does not have a good ending. So I will just say for myself, I think I'm both excited and really do want to see this go on in a very successful way. Alderman Gay had his hand up, and then Jody had her hand up. So
can I just say something quick, Mr. Chair?
Sure, of course.
Just to add on to what you're saying, because I left my paperwork in the office, but I mean, even the financial implications per person diverted is about $87,000 for them just to be held in detention. So, there's a lot of, things that we can look at in the future to say, look, this, not only did it help save people, but we saved money as a county, state, city on, locking people up for low-level crimes.
Good point. Thank you. Alderman Gay?
I'll let Jody go first. She may be answering my question.
All right. Madam Finance Director?
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate what the grant application says about continued funding. I think it's clear there's anticipated that it's possible the grant funds could be terminated. It says the mayor's office and Annapolis Police will contribute funds to continuation of lead Annapolis program if grant funds are terminated. So there is anticipation that at some point this grant could be not funded by federal or state or whoever's put in the funds. Does not specify, however, how much we have to put in. It doesn't say an amount in that application. So it doesn't necessarily infer that, as of right now, that we have to put in the entire amount that was going to be programmed for this purpose. So I just wanted to reiterate what it says in the application.
Where do you see that? I didn't see that language.
So Ms. Leonard was the first one who pointed it out, and I couldn't find it easily either. But if you look at the page 3 of the application, it's under sustainability, that way at the bottom, just one sentence.
Oh, thank you. I didn't see it either. Alderman Gay?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess kind of tying up the some concerns as to where it be placed and how they work with the chief. I think it goes back again to what we talked about Monday and how important it is for us to really establish that Office of Community Caring Services, because we're seeing now that so many of the individual activities that we may be taking on, whether it be the lead program, the ambulance config, thing that's going on, all of it ties back to that individual program or to that individual office. And so does I don't have the contract in front of me, but does it say specifically that it has to be attached to the police department, or that it has to work underneath of the police department? Is that in writing?
Yes. Yes.
So if it was to move from under you managing this, then it'd have to go, it'd have to be managed by someone in the police department.
No, we don't. We didn't. It doesn't say that, but we have to have this is a program.
A working relationship, yes, but it doesn't have to be managed by, correct?
No.
Okay, yeah.
Like, for example, in other jurisdictions, the health department actually got the money for the lead department, like in Ward, I believe in Worcester, somewhere on the Eastern Shore, Worcester or something like that. But yeah.
Hey, I'm looking to the committee members. Our function here is to accept this grant for appropriation purposes. I think we've gotten a lot of very useful information and productive dialogue. I would ask if the chief or anyone else wants to weigh in, and if not, I would ask for a motion and a second from the committee, and then we can have any subsequent dialogue. But I want to thank everybody. Approval. All right.
I'll second that if we're ready, but I do have an amendment to that approval.
Okay. Let's hear your amendment, please.
I would like to see that there is cooperation and approval from the police department in the hiring.
All right. I would turn to Ms. Leonard. Is that something that is, I guess, first of all, within the powers of the Finance Committee, but also how would that amendment be worked? It would be an amendment to the acceptance of the appropriation, if I'm understanding the mechanisms correctly. Is that?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, the grant application already envisions management with the police department. So this would just be I can't speak today. It would just be a more specific detail related to that management requirement.
And would it strengthen all of the dialogue that's been going on in your concern?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, and I was never alluding to the fact that this relationship was never in place. I just wanted to make sure, since the mayor's office applied, which is an anomaly, and the mayor's office application did the application, I just want to make sure the police were actively involved, because this is a grant that has to involve police. So yes, I believe it would strengthen it. And otherwise I don't, I'm not worried about it. I just wanted to confirm that everybody was working together the way the grant program envisioned that it needed to work together.
Takia, do you have the language for the motion?
I do, but can you restate it just so I can make sure I have it correct?
Alderman Finlayson, could you restate your motion, and then I'll recognize you, Alderman Payon.
Okay, I thought it was Alderman Payon's motion to give a favorable recommendation to SA 621. And I was amending that to say that there will be equal cooperation with the police department in the hiring of this person.
Equal cooperation between the mayor's
police
office?
department and the mayor's office, yes.
Right, all right. Alderman Payon, and I am looking for a second.
I don't think it's necessary. I think we're spending a lot of time on something that's already there. If we don't have cooperation, then obviously that defeats the whole purpose of the grant. It's already written in the grant that we would cooperate. I appreciate my colleague's concern, but without cooperation, this whole thing means nothing, and we don't need to. It's already there. I mean, why are we doing it again?
So I would point out that we're discussing the motion before we have a second, so I will second the motion so that we can have this discussion. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, Alderman Payon, you heard from the police chief as well as from Mrs. Leonard, both who shared their concerns about their actual participation in this grant. So this is simply strengthening what is perceived to be in the grant application. And yes, I feel that it's necessary to do that.
I saw the chief's hand up a moment ago. Chief, did you have something to offer in this regard?
I was just going to make the point that even to enter this grant, I think you have to enter into the grant management system. I think after September 22nd, they're going to just grants. And we even have to database this through the police department because inherently it's a law enforcement grant. It has to be managed through law enforcement. So that has to be understood and up front, that the grant can't even be appropriately processed and managed without us entering it. And so we have to have another discussion about who we hire to manage it. As it stands now, I don't have the bandwidth, so we have to have a future discussion. Not that I'm being wordy, but those are kind of things we must consider. I have to have a grant manager and somebody to even enter it into a GMS, or after the 22nd of September, it'll be just grants in order for the grant to be tracked appropriately and managed appropriately. We can partner with anybody, but it has to come through logistically through the police department, and we have to make sure we have the personnel to do it. So that's all I wanted to add.
So let me respond to that because I hear two separate issues. One, there's an issue for
that's actually correct.
And, let me just finish, please, and then I'll get to you, Tola. I think there's an issue with you and the city manager that is a separate budget issue, but I also think there is a concern about, and maybe Tola, this is what you wanted to speak to, about the auspices under which this help is given, and a concern, which I have heard, that if it's a police department program that may cause some people to shy away from this, that's not something I can speak to with authority, but it is a concern, and it is a concern I've heard raised. And Tola, if that's what you wanted to speak to, maybe you can pick up that thread.
No, I was just saying that, not to disagree with Chief Jackson saying, but I'm in the I was entered and became an authorized signer for the GMS system through the governor's office, and they approved me to manage the grant in the GMS system. So it doesn't need to, they don't need to hire anyone. They've already approved me to be the authorized signer or authorized official for the grant. So I would be entering all, grant management, I would be handling all entries into the grant management system. I'm already in there and approved by the state governor's office.
Chief? Chief, did you have your hand up?
I was just giving thumbs up as long as there's somebody to do it, but I was under my understanding of it, it probably should have been from the police department, but we can table that discussion. But that's good. That's good.
Right. Mr. Gerald, you've heard some of this byplay. Are you comfortable with where we are? We have two motions, first an amendment and then the motion to approve. Anything that you feel you need to add at this point, or are you comfortable with where we're headed?
No, I'm 100% comfortable. And number one, we need this money. This is a good source of funding that I think everybody agrees that we need and that we're going to make good use of, and the police will be involved. And Tola will be involved because we want Tola to be involved. He's the right person to be involved on the mayor's side.
So there's one person who's been here the whole time that we haven't heard from, and that's Mr. Rao. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Will?
First of all, I want to say thank you all to committee members and the council at large to also acknowledge that even having this conversation, though it seems tricky, is pretty amazing, because heretofore, like, we literally have not had the level of true conversation around a lot of these issues. So I want to commend each and every one of you, even though, it can be a bit tedious, but just remembering that, Tola's efforts to bring attention to awareness around these community level issues is to be commended as well. And I want to thank Mayor Buckley as well for setting the stage and providing the atmosphere for us to be able to tackle some of these challenging issues. I wanted the only reason why I'm here today in support of my colleagues in the mayor's office and the awesome work they're doing, but I also wanted to, there was an item for a donation for an internship program that we initiated. We've had a few different iterations of our internship program with various staff members for various programmatic initiatives, one of which was the internship program for the young people, and that was high school students. They completed that in the course of the summer. It just ended at the end of August. And the next is Adetola has an intern who is a college student and doing amazing work in a lot of his programmatic efforts. We also have Laura Gutierrez, who has 2 interns with her, and they're doing amazing work along with Tola and his health outreach workers. But there's another intern who's going to be working on communications and social media, and then we will have one for Civilian Review Board as well. I said all that to kind of set the stage for what this item is, which is a donation from Forward Brewery. And this donation comes from a really interesting program called Bakers Against Racism, which was founded in Washington, D.C. By 2 chefs. And they decided, one of the ways they could help community level efforts in our goal towards race equity is to actually impact it by giving funds and donations to nonprofit organizations, but also some programmatic entities. In our case, Forward Brewery, which is located in Eastport. So Ross, shout out to your ward.
I know it well.
All right. So Cam and his wife approached me saying that they would love to support some of what's happening in the mayor's office programmatically. And they specifically said that they wanted it to go towards an apprenticeship, internship entity, model. And that model, once we had conversations about that, it came to be, of course, our internship program. So today, what I wanted to do is just highlight the fact that they donated $1,187 for our internship program. And the item that's on here today is to be sure or to ask for you all support for that to be allocated to exactly that. And it's noted.
Well, can I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
Yes.
We're in the middle of 2 motions. I think this is new business, and I'm happy to hear about it. But I'd like to conclude the business that's on the table now, if you don't mind.
Oh, no.
So we can get this, I assume, appropriation approved
Yeah.
and working. But I want to hear more about your information, but I will also point out we've got a time bind and we really do need to get to the chief of police about other things. I think you've conveyed a lot of the information and I am sympathetic to it, but we have a motion to approve recommend approval of this appropriation, and we have an amendment. Let's take the amendment first. Is there any further discussion on the amendment from Alderwoman Finlayson? If not, I would ask for a vote. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Alderman Payon, I think, went to lunch. I don't know. He's not here, but the motion carries. We now have, pardon me? There you go.
I voted aye.
Oh, thank you. We now have the motion to recommend approval, or are we recommending approval of this SA-6? I would thank everyone by indicating their approval by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Again, this was very arduous, but as Mr. Rouse said, this is the kind of conversation that we haven't had and that we need to have on these issues. It's very important, and it's very important if we're going to turn a corner and change the way we do business in the city of Annapolis and hopefully in the whole rest of the country. So I thank everyone for giving us a lot of input and a lot of things to think about. And I thank my colleagues on the council for supporting this, I think, very important step. The next item on the agenda is another important item, and it's a discussion with the chief of police. We have been hearing a lot of reports, some of them coming from police officers, that the city of Annapolis defunded the police department. And I do not believe that to be the case, but I think we need to be very clear what the budget appropriation for the police department was, and specifically how much money we appropriated for the number of officers authorized, how many officers are authorized, and a secondary discussion is how many officers do we actually have, and that carries with it this whole notion that we're slowing down filling vacancies. But the very first question I have is, how many sworn officers are currently authorized in the fiscal 21 budget? And I'll look to anyone who can answer that.
I'll speak up on that. As far as in the budget, we have 124 sworn positions.
Okay, so 124. And do we have, Jody, what is the appropriation for the sworn officers? Is it for all 124?
The answer is no. We took a turnover. The positions are there, but like in every operating budget, we posted turnover against the budget, assuming some of the positions would be left vacant. And if you want specifics, I'm going to have to get those schedules opened up.
I will need specifics. I think the finance and the council needs specifics, but also we need specifics because of the ongoing Board of Appeals concern, and this is very germane to whether or not we're meeting adequate public facilities. So to me, that we continue to authorize 124, which I think is the number, close to the number that we're supposed to have for adequate public facilities, is an answer to the perspective that officers have that we're defunding the police department, which is a very topical statement, but not very well defined. I will just speak for myself personally, but I have consulted with my colleagues on the committee and the council. I do not feel that we defunded in any way the police department, and particularly not in the context of taking money away from police and giving it to other kinds of activities. But I think it's important that we have that discussion. And then I do think, as a secondary, we need to talk about the number of police officers, warrant officers we actually have on board, because that's always a concern. David, I see your hand raised, and I'd welcome input from you, because I think this is a very important issue.
Yeah, and I do too. And I think the defunding is, how we define that is an important part of all this, because if you talk about the fact that we had to reduce every single department's budget, if you define that as defunding, then we defunded every single department in order to address the deficit that was projected. It wasn't to move it to other social programs, like a lot of people are talking about defunding and moving the funding from police to social programs. We did it simply because we were projecting a deficit, which $3 million we've already taken out of department budgets to cover that $3 million projected. Now we're looking at another $3 million on top of that. So I think it's important that we understand, number one, that every department was defunded, the funding was reduced for each one, and that was simply to cover the projected deficit and not to fund other programs.
I thank you for that. To me, defunding carries a negative connotation. It says we're not going to give the police as much as we gave them before because we don't like what they're doing, or something to that effect. I can tell you, I do not have that opinion. I do not believe the members of the Finance Committee have that opinion, nor do I believe the members of the City Council. And I am looking for, from my own perspective, an affirmation that we do fully support police. We also actually fully support all of the changes that Chief Jackson and the mayor's office are initiating in response to social needs, very important social needs. But I do not feel we did anything from the Finance Committee or the City Council budget actions that was a negative statement in terms of our feelings towards the police department. And I would really, I'm looking for a way to go on record that we don't have that intention. We are struggling, as David said, across all departments to deal with financial circumstances largely brought on by COVID, but also by some other factors that are always ongoing in terms of revenue flows versus expenditure flows. But I would turn to my colleagues on the council to see, first of all, if they share what I'm trying to express, and also hear their expressions about whether or not we've defunded the police department.
May I, Mr. Chair? I totally agree with your sentiment. I have heard from community folks that they've heard from other elected officials, as well as members of our police department, that they've been defunded. And I've had a discussion with Chief Jackson because I was very disturbed to hear that that's what some of our officers think. And maybe we need to not use the term defunding at all, but rather if we had to take a reduction in every department, then we use that terminology. You know, all of us have received many letters suggesting that we defund police, defund fire, and defund OEM. And almost on a daily basis do we get one or two letters making that request. And when we use that terminology, the assumption is that we are doing what these letters are suggesting. Our police officers need to know that we are not taking funding from their budgets. to fund social programs that are definitely needed, absolutely, and that we are working hard to make sure we get funding for them. But it is not at the expense of our public safety folks. And there are folks in the community who are very disturbed to hear that we are defunding public safety in any form or fashion, because then they feel unsafe. So I think we should be clear about the terminology that we use, and I think it should be consistent across the board to send the message to the community that we are not defunding the police or any other department, but we are simply having to reduce their revenue because all revenues are down. Chief Jackson, how are you handling this? If I might, Mr. Chair, ask the chief how he's handling this in his department. And I have 13 minutes, Mr. Chair.
All right, well, let me just say, I want to hear from the chief, but then I'm going to recognize Alderman Payon, Alderman Gay, and then Mr. Rao. But I think it's very important to hear from the chief and the administration at this point, because I think we feel very strongly this is very important that we.
First of all, I made it clear to my senior level staff that, and I'll be putting something out in writing, especially after hearing what I've just heard. I stated at the last staff meeting, I believe, that that issue had come up, and I launched actually an internal investigation, not with an eye towards punishing anybody, because that's the officer's interpretation. That's their interpretation. But I asked the officers not to speak to things like that. It's only a few people in this building at 199 Taylor Avenue that really understands the budget. And so if they're out there saying these things, it's based on secondhand information and it's not based on any direct knowledge they have of the budget or the budget process. Dave Miguez, Paul Herman, myself, and maybe one or two others are the only ones that even have a handle on the budget. So I'm going to put something out saying that officers are not permitted to speak to that. It's not a free speech issue. If they don't, we can't have them putting out information that causes the public concern that they don't have the protection. Now, I've expressed to this council, and I've expressed it privately as the chief of police, I do have the concerns that the APF formula is not congruent to our current staffing. And that's been a bone of contention. When I get these APFs from Dr. Sally Nash, we have to calculate the formula based on what we have. If we are going to be, if we're going to operate the adequate public facilities formula and the local ordinance with integrity, then I have to talk about what I have. I'm currently staffed at about either 113 or 114. Of course, we authorize 124, and when I do the 3.2 per 1,000, I have to base that on what we actually have, as opposed to, because we have to justify our protection of the city then, and when new development comes in. So it's those kind of things. Then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet, is that I'm going to make sure today at my staff meeting, we do delineate the two. I mean, some considerations of the budget, some things that were impacted by the budget was the pandemic, COVID-19. That has nothing to do with the movement. It's just COVID-19, a pandemic that none of us had control over. Other things was a result of public perception about police services. So I'm going to put out an order under my signature that nobody's to speak to the budget or to say that we've been defunded. Members of the agency can only speak to the things that they have direct knowledge of or expertise.
Yeah, I understand that and I appreciate that. But it's also important to me, and I think the council, we don't want officers to feel that way either. I think it's their feeling and their morale that is actually the bigger issue for me, and so I am very concerned about this. But let me go on to recognize Alderman Payon and Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this all came out of our rather robust discussion about the possibility of cutting down the, if you will, empty positions in the budget as a way of saving money. We discussed that every year they put in for 124. Regrettably, the police department, despite their best efforts, have not been successful. They haven't come close to hiring enough people to take up that money. It gets sent over either to a different department or within the police department for a different purpose. And we talked about the possibility of cutting it down to 120 or 118, which would leave them plenty of room for to hire new people when you take into account retirements. And I remember the city manager said, well, we take that into account, for the budget and et cetera, et cetera. It did not pass. It did not go through. But I think, as I understand it, that's where this business of cutting the police or defunding the police originated. I mean, it was a very robust discussion. It was a very serious discussion. And it had really nothing but had the best interest of the police department in mind as we talked about it. Nobody has ever wanted to, defund the police. And I think that, somebody turns a TV on and hears half a conversation or half an argument or misinterprets an argument which maybe was above their head or something. I don't know. But that's, as I understand it, was the origin of it. And Chief, I think if you would, just put something out that makes it very clear that this council and this finance committee is not about to defund the police department, I think that would be a good idea for everybody.
And it's not about to, we didn't. Alderman Gay, and thank you for being here. I appreciate your contribution to the meeting.
No problem. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I think first that if we did attempt to defund the police department, it was a lousy attempt because of $21 million. I think we only messed with, defunded, reimagined, whatever you want to call it, $950,000 roughly from that department. Right. Jody, could you give me a correct number on that? So, that just kills the argument that we were out here defunding the police department. If that was the case, our Office of Community Caring Service would be fully funded. We'd have free childcare in the city, and a number of things with that $21 million budget. I would like to add to the conversation that when that movement started and it still continues, when you speak of defunding, reimagining, whatever you like to call it, the police department, and Chief, I'd like your opinion on this. Because I am not a police officer and I've not, been in the eye of fire or anything like that. But I'd like to think that the police department would generally agree with that, considering the fact that those funds or any funding would then be put to social services, which would then, in return, as we talked about throughout this course of this whole meeting, cut down on a number of the things that we like to in our community as it relates to nonviolent crimes. So this whole the whole conversation and idea of defunding and all of that stuff is something that everybody can get on board with because we like to see our communities in a better place at the end of the day. And as I mentioned Monday night, I think our police department has done a fabulous job. In the wake of everything that's happened in August with the multiple shootings and deaths, I think they have made our neighbors feel secure. And those families feel secure. And so I don't think that, while obviously, there may be differences in how we like to achieve the goal. I think that generally we are all on the same page. And I made that very clear with Chief Jackson as well in our private conversations. I would agree with, with the correct verbiage. I would agree with, some resolution or whatever that would make that clear.
Thank you. Just a programming note before I recognize Will. Sheila has to leave soon. Sheila, I'm going to ask that we reschedule the discussion of the quarterly ending information that we got from the finance department. I think it's very important information and actually reaffirming information about how well our departments are doing in managing our budget because virtually everything came in underfunding. But I know you have to leave. I'd like to, with your permission, continue in hearing from Mr. Rao, and then I think we need to discuss what, if anything, the Finance Committee or the Council needs to do in terms of a reaffirming statement to the public, and most specifically to the police officers about our support for them. But let me turn to Mr. Rao, and Sheila, obviously you need to leave when you need to leave.
Thank you, Alderman Ross and Chair. I do want to just very briefly take a snapshot of this moment because again, even though these are tough conversations, I do want to commend you all for having these conversations and even looking around the screen, seeing that we are putting on the table these tough issues, and they're not easily, dissected. They're not easily dissected, but the building blocks are there. So I want us to all, stay on course and not shy away from these tough conversations, including Alderman Gay. Everything that you just said, I 100% agree with. I do want to add a little bit of a larger vision on what is, couched as defunding and couched as, solely focusing on the police department and law enforcement, which it isn't. And so a part of the movement began, though it did begin with the shooting of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement as we see it today. Remember that, and I know a lot of you all were on the council then, we had a hearty discussion about police reform in 2015. I believe, 2016, 2015, where we came before a lot of you all, and it was a portfolio and a series of recommendations around police reform. So I do want us to kind of remember that a lot of the conversations as it relates to not defunding, but as it looks at really evaluating the balance between what happens in terms of community investment and in terms of community programs and issues that affect that long-term issues that have built up to create what we see in communities now are very, very important for all of us to pay attention to. So while we want to focus on the defunding part, remember that what we're actually doing also is we're looking at how to fine-tune our city institutional systems so that they meet our constituents where they are. And so we had a really hearty town hall, conversation that Alderwoman Finlayson put together and Alderman Payon was on. And within that, we did have discussions about the intersection between law enforcement and community, particularly communities of color, whether it's Latino or African American. So it isn't just the defunding part, so I don't want us to get hung up on that. It is saying what our constituents have asked is that we really, really, really take the time and look at the impact that mass incarceration, the impact that the war on drugs and all of those things has at the community level. So I just want us to stay the course on that and know that that is not an attack on our police department. It is in actuality looking at how we can best utilize both law enforcement, but also our city systems to meet people where they are and improve their quality of life. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But again, we're on the right path. Our city attorneys, Carrie and Ashley, really even looking at where we were, if you remember, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that we're having these conversations within the context of city government. Like, that's a win. It's a win. And it's a tough battle, but we're winning. We just have to stay on it. So, I got to go, but thank you all for even letting me be, a part of this conversation, but also the conversation. Thumbs up. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Will. And committee, I don't know whether we want to do this as a committee, but I think somehow either the committee or the council needs to find a way to let our police officers in particular know that we support their efforts. But I think we need to let the community writ large know that as well. There clearly have to be changes. There are urgent social needs to make changes, and we have to be part of that process. But we also have to maintain business as usual, and we cannot do that when part of our workforce feel undervalued or unvalued. And so I'm not sure we'll be able to do it in this meeting, but I think this is something I don't want to let go. City Manager, I know you're in sync with that. We've got to make sure, and really this is across all staff. I will just say quickly, remember years ago, Director Gerald, or then Director Gerald, you pointed out 24 things that Public Works was doing, which we were largely innocent of. And we said, wow, this is fantastic. And we need to let people know about it. We need to continually let our staff and our constituents know about all of the things that the city does for them day in and day out. We don't always do it right or the best way, but we certainly have our hearts in it and we're doing it. And we need to remind people, particularly when they complain about their tax bill or their pothole, all of the things that we do. But for morale issues in particular, and I think morale's got to be low on the city because we're having budget problems, but that does not mean that we are undervaluing or don't value our workforce. And we've got to make sure we find a way to get that message out. I would look to you, David, for a response on that. And then I think we're probably going to have to think about adjourning without finishing all of our business.
Mr. Chair, if I could really quickly.
Yeah, certainly.
Are we still giving the hazard pay?
Through the CARES Act? Yeah, I believe so.
For the public safety?
That was a one-time payment, and that's already been made.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
And I'll report back that the turnover in the police was 940 in total after the amendments and our initial turnover, 940,000 about.
Yeah, it's big. There's no doubt about it. And it's problematic. And it was always tough to get all of the sworn officers we needed to be on the street. And I guess in the sense that City Manager Gerald mentioned that we defunded everybody in that sense. But it was not, as Alderwoman Finlayson met, part of meeting this national cry to defund police. My God, where would we be if we did something like that? But I guess I'd like to give the city manager the last word before we adjourn on this.
Mr. Chairman, before you do that, I'm wondering if, this is Susie, I'm wondering if you might not just approve the $1,000 check so that we can. We
don't have that on our agenda, and we don't have that before us.
You amended the agenda earlier to add that essay on, the 1,187,000, didn't we?
Yes. And this literally.
I'm not sure that we did.
Yes, you amended the agenda to add it. It's essay 1121.
All right, I haven't seen it. That's the problem with these last minute.
This is the check from the Forward Brewing. It literally was a donation. They wanted to make a donation for the Civilian Review Board effort. And so you're literally just processing this money into the city so that it's accounted for. And
Ross, we got it late Monday afternoon.
All right.
From 4:30 to 5 o'clock.
What's the sense of the committee? Do I hear a motion to approve SA 11?
So moved.
Alderwoman Finlayson, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I do have it, and I would second that motion.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving SA 11 signify by saying aye. Aye. The ayes have it. So
Mr.
again,
Chair, I've got to leave the meeting right now, so.
all right, well, thank you for being here for that last vote. Let's let Mr. Gerald have the last word and then we'll adjourn.
Okay, well, clearly it's a very difficult time to be a police officer anywhere in the United States, and that also includes Annapolis. So anything that we can do, and I've got to say, I appreciate Alderman Gay saying the things that he said, both today and at the council meeting, because that goes a long way for our police officers. And I know the mayor wants to go down or out to Taylor Avenue and meet with the police officers and say the same sorts of things that Alderman Gay so articulately said the other night. They've had a tough summer. They have worked a lot of hours. I talk to Chief all the time about how morale is, and it's a tough time. It's a tough time in the city, period, but particularly the police department. So I think anything that we can do for them to show the appreciation that we all feel for the job that they've done these past 6 months since the COVID started. I think the hazard pay was helpful, and I think they really appreciate that, but I think we still have a ways to go. So the support that you all expressed today, I think, helps.
I'd like to find a way to move forward and make it a support in writing through some motion, but I don't know that we have time to handle that today in this meeting unless Alderman Payon, you have an idea, but we don't have Alderwoman Finlayson with us now. But I think this is a very important thing. And then I do agree with you, City Manager Gerald, we probably need to be making that kind of statement of support for all of the staff, but this defunding issue is really a plague, and we've got to address that. But Alderman Payon, I will give you the last word, including a motion to adjourn after you're done.
You got it. I move to adjourn.
All right. Thank you. I second that motion. A very good meeting, and thank you everyone for your participation and enduring all of this long meeting, but I think a very important meeting. So all those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. We are adjourned.